Good afternoon. This is student Darius Suhan. I'm making my final presentation for course AHA-442 being held at National Louis University. The book that we've been using for this course is written by George D. Posgar. It is titled The Second Edition, Legal and Ethical Issues. I think it was a very wonderful book, a lot of good reading, a lot of good information, and it was absolutely a pleasure to read it and to get all the information that we needed for this course. I'd like to start out my presentation by just acknowledging our teacher, our instructor, Miss Marlene. Excellent teacher. We would submit our assignments on Sunday, the latest by Sunday, and by Monday everything was graded and already posted. Very thorough. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful course. I'd like to start out, the way I'll cover this video is basically we'll work down on a weekly basis what was covered. I'm going to talk about the case studies that I selected for each week, along with some important topics that we had covered for that week and what I have learned and taken from this course. Week one of the case studies that I selected from the book was Who Makes the Rules? Basically what it was about was that Mr. Jones was trying to get earlier flight to visit his ailing wife. He had a flight reserved for later that day or the next day, and his wife got sick and he wanted to go home a little bit earlier. And basically what happened, he ended up going to different people trying to get a ticket for the earlier flight and was let down several times. Basically they told him that the gate manager has the final say, and the gate manager, I guess, didn't fully understand the situation and declined his request. I believe, as I wrote in my paper, that common sense should have played out here. If there was an open seat on an earlier flight, and actually wouldn't want to bump somebody that already had a seat unless it was a life and death situation, but if there was an open seat, why not let Mr. Jones board the plane and go home and see his ailing wife? So basically, you know, the rules are not consistent of what the supervisor said, because he has said that we cannot overrule the agent at the gate, which to me implies that the agent could have made a decision to let Mr. Jones go, but he didn't, and probably because he didn't understand the full situation. In week one, we covered several topics. There's quite a bit of reading. The topics that were covered in week one were that of ethics and ethical dilemmas. We covered the topic of morality. We also covered topics of codes of conduct and moral judgments. A lot of good information. Obviously there are legal and moral judgments. Sometimes one takes precedence over the other, but yeah, ultimately you have to be confident with the decision that you make, and hopefully it's the right one. In week two, the case study that I selected, it was a failure to inform alternative procedures. This was on page 356 of chapter 12. Basically, what it is that some medical facilities or doctors, they get in a habit of just doing the same thing over and over the way they know. There's some doctors that are very good about going back for further education and trying to learn new things. There's others, obviously, that just get compliant with doing it one way and one way only, and that's the way that they want to have it done. I had a personal situation in this. I had some varicose vein on one of my legs, which is hereditary, and went to a couple of doctors. One of my primary doctors, they had suggested going for vein stripping, which is a very painful procedure and pretty much takes you out for about 2 weeks hospitalized. Recovery time is very long, very painful. So I did a little bit more investigation of my own. Ended up going to a laser clinic right here in my town of Schaumburg. I live in Addison, but the town over in Schaumburg. And there was a doctor there that informed me about a new vein procedure. Basically what they do is just go in with a small catheter. The vein gets laser ablation, the vein basically shrivels up, dies, and the body absorbs it. Total time of the procedure, probably 30 minutes to 45 minutes maximum. Very little discomfort, able to walk out of the office and just go home, relax for that afternoon, and back to work the following day. So I guess case in point here is that you really need to do your homework on your own and get several opinions. You really just can't rely on what someone tells you. Topics that were covered in week 2, we talked about ethical and legal issues of patients. We talked about Darwinism and the refusal of care. And we also talked about patient abuse and the patient's rights and responsibilities. Patient abuse in this country, to me, seems like it's a very big issue. I think the major reason that this occurs is a lot of the nursing homes are a for-profit type of facility. They try to take as much money from the patients and families as possible, basically, bankrupting estates and taking over estates and so forth. But on the same token, when it comes to hiring employees for these facilities, they are not fully trained. They lack compassion. Some even have criminal records. And this is where the problem comes in with the abuse. I believe that they should have better hiring standards, look for more qualified professional people, and have a pay increase where they can recruit these people that would come and work, that are not going to come work for minimum wage, which is sometimes the case. In week 3, the case review that I did was untimely diagnosis. On page 277. In this case, basically an error had been made by the clinic, and what happened is the clinic basically didn't have the proper protocols in place to prevent this diagnosis that was rendered wrong to the patient. As in one of my papers, I had this personal experience myself as well. My wife was pregnant with our first child. We went in for amniotic fluid testing. They took the sample, and a few days later they contacted us by phone stating that the baby would be born with spinal bifida because the other numbers were off. So obviously my wife was very upset. I was upset. We had to sit and think about very long what we wanted to do. Very difficult decision, very difficult few days in our life. It basically lasted about a week. And then about a week later, we get a phone call from the hospital, which was a major university here in Chicago, just simply stating, oh, they're sorry, we made a mistake, everything looked fine, basically that our math was off. We had calculated prematurely the weeks pregnant, and basically the math was off and everything was fine, and have a nice day. So you can imagine, it was a great relief to hear that, obviously, but on the same token, protocols were not in place, which created a lot of stress for myself and my wife. Topics covered for week 3, we talked about the impact of ethics and law on healthcare professionals. We talked about code of ethics. Obviously, there should be a code of ethics in every work environment, but especially in the medical field. We talked about poor judgment and immoral conduct. We talked about sexual abuse in the workplace. Specifically, talked about dentists touching patients that are under sedation and things like that. Obviously, this type of thing goes on in nursing homes. Also goes on with patients that are mentally retarded. Have read several cases and instances about this type of sexual abuse occurring. As one of my teachers had told our class in our nuclear medicine course that I completed, obviously we deal with many patients, male, female patients. She had told us as a male technologist that you never want to put yourself in that position. And I followed that through 100%. Basically, if you have a female patient, always make sure if someone can't be there to assist you, always leave the door open. And just basically, just don't put yourself in that position. Not everyone